They say death brings families together. But on the day we buried my husband, I stood at his grave and realized it can also show you just how alone you truly are. Before we get into the story, tell us in the comment section where you are watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave your honest review. I remember that morning vividly. The mansion, our home for over 20 years, looked like it was dressed in grief. Black drapes hung heavy across the windows, muffling the light. Outside, the rain poured endlessly, as if the heavens themselves had chosen to mourn with me. Inside, silence pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but loud with everything unsaid. This was the day I was supposed to say goodbye to my husband, the man who had built an empire, the man who had fought for every brick of the mansion I lived in, the man who had once promised me forever. And yet, as I adjusted my black veil and prepared to walk into the chapel room for the service, I realized I wasn't just grieving his death. I was grieving something else, something far more painful. My children were not there. Daniel, my eldest, had once told me that funerals were a waste of time, that mourning should be done privately. But I knew the truth. He cared more about the deals he was closing than the father he'd lost. Lila, my only daughter, sent me a brief message the night before. "I can't make it, Mom. Too many commitments this week. I'll light a candle for Dad." Commitments? I wondered if she meant another society gala or another photo shoot she so desperately craved to stay relevant in her glamorous circle. And Aaron, my youngest. He didn't even call, he simply sent a text. "Sorry, busy." Busy doing what? Probably nursing a hangover or wasting away in some club, drowning in the wealth his father had worked tirelessly for. 3 children. 3 different excuses. And not one of them cared enough to stand by me or their father in his final moments on this earth. So there I was, walking alone down the aisle of the chapel where the casket lay at the front. But I wasn't completely alone. Elena was there. Elena, our maid for over 2 decades, stood quietly by the pews, her head bowed in reverence. Beside her, her husband clutched his hat nervously, as though he wasn't sure he belonged in such a grand place. But they were there. Loyal, present, and that mattered more than they could ever know. A handful of my husband's old business partners sat in stiff silence as well, attending out of obligation more than love. They nodded at me politely but avoided my eyes, as though guilt clung to their collars for the ways they had profited from him in life. The chapel felt cavernous. Empty. My husband had commanded rooms with hundreds of people, but at his funeral, only a handful came. When I sat down, I stared at the polished wood of his coffin and thought about the nights leading up to this moment. My husband knew death was coming. He felt it in his bones long before the doctors confirmed it. And he worried, not about himself, but about the legacy he would leave behind. "Margaret," he had told me one evening, when the sickness had made his voice weak, but his eyes still burned with clarity. "Our children, they are not ready. I gave them everything, and in doing so, I gave them nothing. They don't know the value of sacrifice, of loyalty, of love." I remember holding his hand, trying to soothe him. "They'll learn," I whispered, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. And neither was he. As the priest spoke the rites and the rain hammered the stained glass windows, I thought of all the missed moments. How Daniel had stopped visiting altogether once he became an executive at a major firm. How Lila only came around if she needed money for a new venture or wanted to show off her glamorous lifestyle. How Aaron, my baby, once promised his father he would take over one of the smaller companies, only to abandon it when the workload became too much. And when my husband was in the hospital, hooked up to tubes, fighting for breath, none of them came. I was there. Elena was there. Her husband, too. They sat with me through long nights, fetching food, praying quietly, even holding his hand when I needed a moment to cry. But my children, they chose distance. They chose indifference. At the graveside, when the coffin was lowered into the earth, the sound of dirt striking the wood echoed like a drumbeat of finality. My chest ached with every thud. Elena wept softly beside me. Her husband whispered words of comfort to her. It struck me then, how they grieved more for my husband than his own children did. When the last handful of earth was laid and the priest spoke the final blessing, I lingered. My black umbrella shook under the force of the rain, but I couldn't walk away just yet. That's when the lawyer approached. A tall man, stern, with papers tucked under his arm. His presence felt out of place at the graveside, as though business had intruded on grief. He bowed his head politely. "Mrs. Clark," he said, "your husband left instructions for me to give you this." From his coat pocket, he produced a sealed envelope, thick and heavy, with my husband's handwriting scrawled across the front. My breath caught at the sight of his familiar script. The lawyer's eyes softened for just a moment. "He said you would need courage. That what comes next will not be easy." My hands trembled as I clutched the envelope. My heart pounded. What did my husband mean? What truths were hidden in this letter? I slipped it into my coat, too afraid to open it there, in the rain, surrounded by eyes. But something inside me knew. This letter held answers. Answers my children would not be ready for. Because whatever was written in that will, it was going to change everything. So as I turned away from the grave, the mansion looming in the mist behind me, I gripped that letter tightly. My husband's voice echoed in my mind. They will learn the truth of who truly stood by us. And in that moment, I knew. The will was not what my children expected. Not even close. 3 weeks since I lowered my husband into the earth. 3 weeks since I stood in the rain, clutching his final letter. The words, "They will learn the truth," haunting me night after night. The mansion, once filled with life and his commanding presence, had grown colder. Every creak of the hallway reminded me of what I had lost. And yet, I knew today would bring no comfort, no healing. Today, my children were finally coming home. Not for me, not even for their father, but for his fortune. I can still see the scene as if it's happening before me now. The grand living room was dressed in heavy velvet curtains, and the air smelled faintly of old leather and polished wood. At the center sat a long mahogany table where the lawyer had spread a stack of documents, like a dealer preparing cards for a high-stakes game. I sat quietly, hands folded, every muscle in my body taut with anticipation. Elena moved softly around the room, placing trays of tea and biscuits no one had asked for. She always believed in small comforts, even in tense moments. And then, the doors opened. Daniel was the first to walk in, my eldest. At 32, he had perfected the look of power. A tailored navy suit clung to his lean frame, his hair slicked back like the corporate executives he so desperately wanted to impress. He gave me a shallow nod, the kind you'd give a stranger at a business luncheon. No warmth, no sun to a grieving mother. "Mother," he said curtly, his tone more obligation than affection. "You look well enough." Behind him came Lila, my beautiful daughter, dressed like she had just stepped off the cover of a magazine. At 29, her beauty was her greatest weapon and her greatest curse. A black dress hugged her frame, her icy blonde hair swept elegantly over one shoulder. She didn't embrace me. She didn't even look at me. Her eyes flickered instead to the documents on the table. And then came Aaron, my youngest. My boy who used to trail after me with wide eyes and endless questions. At 25, he had traded innocence for arrogance. His jacket hung loosely on his shoulders, his smirk half amused, half contemptuous. He sauntered in with the air of a man who already knew he was rich. "Finally," he muttered. "Took long enough." They sat across from me, forming a line like judges in a trial. I could feel the distance between us like a canyon. Daniel broke the silence first. "Why was the funeral so private?" he asked, his voice cold. "We should have been involved in arrangements." My chest tightened. "You weren't there," I whispered. "You didn't come." He waved a dismissive hand. "We had our reasons." Lila leaned forward, her manicured fingers tapping the table impatiently. "Let's just get to it." Father wouldn't want us dragging this out. He would want efficiency. Efficiency. My husband's life reduced to a line item in her schedule. Aaron leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. "Yeah, let's read the will. We all know what this is about." His smirk widened. "Let's see who gets the lion's share." The lawyer cleared his throat. He was a serious man, precise in his words. "As executor of your late father's estate, it is my duty to read his will in full without interruption." My children exchanged eager glances. They expected control of the empire, the investments, the properties, the businesses. They expected wealth that would secure their lifestyles for decades. But I knew what was coming, and the knowledge weighed heavy on my chest. The lawyer began with formalities, birth certificates, marriage dates, details of assets. My children fidgeted like restless schoolchildren, impatient for the final grade. And then his voice shifted. Regarding the businesses, investments, and financial holdings of Mr. Clark, he paused as though bracing himself. All of these are hereby placed in a trust. None shall be released directly to his children. The words cut the air like a blade. Daniel shot up in his seat. What? Lila gasped, her painted lips parting in disbelief. That's not possible. Aaron slammed his palm on the table. You must be joking. The lawyer remained calm. It was your father's explicit instruction. The businesses will continue to run under appointed trustees. Profits will be reinvested. Not a single penny shall go directly to the children. My children erupted. Daniel's voice was sharp, furious. I worked in those offices. I handled deals. I deserve. But I remembered the truth. How Daniel once stole credit for his father's project, nearly costing the company millions. Lila clutched her pearls, her voice trembling with outrage. He can't do this. He knows I have obligations society expects me to maintain. But I remembered how she squandered every allowance on designer gowns, failed ventures, and hollow fame. Aaron sneered, jabbing a finger toward me. This is manipulation. You put him up to this, didn't you, Mother? You turned him against us. But I remembered how Aaron abandoned the company he was supposed to manage, selling off assets for quick cash before disappearing into clubs and reckless spending. I stayed silent as their anger filled the room. Inside, my heart broke, but not for their lack of money. It broke for their lack of understanding. My husband's words echoed in my mind. They must learn that love and loyalty are worth more than wealth. The lawyer raised his hand for silence. There is more. The room quieted. My children leaned forward, greedy hope flickering in their eyes. The family mansion, the lawyer continued, is hereby left in full ownership to his wife, Margaret Clark. The words washed over me like a tide. The mansion, the place where I had raised them, where every holiday in memory lived, was mine alone. My children's faces twisted. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Lila's mouth dropped open. Aaron muttered under his breath. Unbelievable. But the lawyer was not finished. He turned another page, his expression grave. And finally, the beach house. The air thickened. That house was a gem of the estate, a sprawling property by the sea worth millions. My children leaned forward, anticipation burning like fire. The lawyer cleared his throat. The beach house is hereby left to Elena, the family maid, and her husband. Gasps tore through the room. Daniel's fists clenched. Lila's face went pale. Aaron's chair screeched backward as he leapt to his feet. What? Daniel roared. To her? Lila spat, her voice sharp with venom. Aaron's voice cracked with disbelief. You're giving our home to the help? The room exploded into chaos, and I sat there, gripping the edge of my chair, my heart pounding. Because this was only the beginning. I had known the will would shock them, but even I wasn't prepared for the storm that followed. For when the truth came out about why my husband left the beach house to Elena, it would tear open wounds none of us were ready to face. The room had exploded into chaos the moment the lawyer announced it. The beach house, left to Elena and her husband. I can still see my children's faces twisted with rage. Daniel's jaw tightened so hard I thought his teeth might break. Lila clutched the edge of the table as if the wood itself could steady her. And Aaron? Aaron's voice cracked with disbelief as he spat. To the maid? You've got to be kidding me. Their words flew like knives, cutting through the air. Daniel was the first to turn his fury toward me. This is your doing, isn't it? He snapped. You manipulated Father. You've always favored her. You've always made excuses for her. He would never leave a property like that to a servant unless you pushed him. His words pierced, but before I could respond, Lila joined in, her voice sharp with venom. Unbelievable. Mother, do you even realize what this looks like? You've replaced your own children with them. She flicked her hand toward Elena, as though even acknowledging her presence was distasteful. Do you really think society won't talk when they find out a maid inherited one of our most valuable estates? Elena froze where she stood, her tray of untouched teacups trembling in her hands. Her husband, sitting quietly beside her, reached over and steadied her fingers, gently prying the tray away before setting it on the side table. He didn't speak, but his silence carried more dignity than all my children's shouting combined. And then Aaron leaned forward, his tone dripping with mockery. Oh, I get it now. She blackmailed him. That's the only explanation. She probably threatened to expose something, or worse, seduced him. How else would a maid end up with beachfront property? My blood ran cold. I slammed my palm against the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Enough, I cried, my voice trembling but strong. Do you hear yourselves? You stand here, heirs of a man who gave you everything, and you insult the only people who stood by him when you would not. They went quiet, but their glares burned into me. And then I said the one thing they didn't expect. Elena and her husband didn't steal anything from you. They saved your father's life. The memory surged back, unbidden, pulling me into the past. It had been 3 years ago, a night thick with panic. My husband had collapsed in his study, his face pale, his breath shallow. I had screamed for help, my voice breaking, but none of you were there. You were too busy, Daniel chasing another deal, Lila at some glamorous gala, Aaron? God knows where. It was Elena who found me on the floor beside him. It was her husband who carried him to the car, who drove like a madman through the night, while Elena held his hand in the back seat, sat whispering prayers, steadying him when I could not. At the hospital, while I called each of you in desperation, none of you answered. Not one. But Elena and her husband stayed. They never left his side. From that day on, your father swore he owed them a debt he could never repay. And leaving them the beach house was his way of saying thank you. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the sound of rain tapping the tall windows. But Daniel's anger only deepened. So what? He snapped. That doesn't make them family. We are his blood, his heirs, not them. I met his glare. Blood means nothing without love. Lila shook her head, tears brimming but quickly blinked away. You're blind, Mother. You've always been blind. You let her worm her way into this family, and now look, she's stolen everything from us. Aaron smirked bitterly. Don't worry, we'll drag her to court. We'll contest this will. I don't care what that piece of paper says, she's not keeping what's ours. The lawyer, who had remained calm through the storm, finally raised his voice. I suggest you all sit down. There's more you need to hear. Reluctantly, they obeyed, though their eyes still burned with fury. He shuffled through the documents and pulled out another set, each stamped with signatures. Your father anticipated this reaction, and he wanted you to know something very important. He laid the papers flat on the table. Each of you was given an opportunity to inherit, and each of you rejected it. Their faces froze. Confusion rippled across the room. The lawyer tapped the documents. Years ago, your father offered each of you stewardship over parts of his estate. Daniel, he gave you a division to oversee. You abandoned it and signed it back when responsibility grew heavy. Lila, you were entrusted with a substantial investment fund. You squandered it on ventures that collapsed. You signed away your rights in exchange for immediate payouts. And Aaron, you were given a company branch. You sold its assets for quick money, signing away your claim in return for cash. One by one, he slid the documents across the table, their signatures staring back at them like ghosts of their own decisions. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel's lips parted, but no words came. Lila's hands shook as she pushed the paper away. Aaron's smirk faltered, his face paling as the truth stared back at him. They had destroyed their own inheritance. Not me. Not Elena. Themselves. I watched them, my heart aching, not with triumph, but with sorrow. Because my husband had been right. They had chosen selfishness over responsibility, wealth over loyalty. And now they had nothing left. I rose slowly from my chair, the weight of the moment pressing on my shoulders. My children looked at me, their eyes wide with shock, betrayal, anger, and beneath it all, fear. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Your father didn't abandon you, you abandoned him. And now you sit here blaming everyone else when the truth is right in front of you. You chose this path, and now you must live with it. They sat in stunned silence, the reality of their loss crashing down like waves against a fragile shore. And as I stood there, gathering my strength, I knew it was time. Time to tell them the final truth their father wanted them to hear. The truth that would either shatter what little bond we had left, or save it. The great hall was cold that evening. Heavy rain lashed against the tall windows, and the chandelier above swayed slightly with each rumble of thunder. I stood at the center of the room, my hands pressed against the carved wooden table, my heart heavy with both grief and resolve. The will had been read. The truth had been spoken. My children, my flesh and blood, had inherited nothing. The mansion had been left to me, the investments locked safely away in trust, and the beach house, ah yes, the beach house, had gone to Elena, our loyal maid, and her husband. The silence in that room was unbearable. It wasn't just silence, it was a storm louder than the one raging outside. My children's eyes burned with betrayal, but beneath their anger, I could see it. Fear. Fear of losing not just wealth, but the power, the identity, the very lives they had built upon their father's fortune. I took a breath. My voice trembled at first, but then it grew steady, echoing across the marble floor. Your father did not leave you with nothing to punish you. He left you with nothing because he hoped you would one day find everything that matters. Love, loyalty, sacrifice. Daniel slammed his hand against the table. His face flushed red, his jaw clenched tight. Love? Loyalty? Do you think these pay the bills, Mother? Do you think these build empires? He betrayed us. I looked at my son, the boy who once clung to his father's legs, begging him to stay home from work so they could play football in the yard. That boy was gone. What stood before me was a man blinded by greed, a man who believed wealth was the only language worth speaking. Daniel, I said softly, he was on his deathbed. He called for you, for all of you. But you did not come, not even for his funeral. And you think money can erase that? The words stung. I could see it in Daniel's eyes. But pride is a cruel master. He grabbed his coat, his voice trembling with rage. This isn't over. I'll fight this. I'll fight you. You'll regret this, Mother. And with that, he stormed into the night, the door slamming behind him so hard it rattled the windows. The silence returned, heavier this time. Lila sat across from me, her hands shaking as she reached for a glass of wine. Her diamond bracelet sparkled, but her eyes were dull, lifeless. She laughed bitterly, a laugh that quickly crumbled into sobs. I have nothing, Mother. Do you understand? Nothing. Without Father's money, I can't keep my house. I can't keep my friends. I can't even keep myself together. She fell to her knees on the cold marble floor, mascara running down her cheeks. For the first time, I saw the truth behind her perfect exterior. She had built her entire life on appearances, and now the foundation had crumbled. I knelt beside her, lifting her chin so our eyes met. Lila, listen to me. You were not left empty-handed. You still have a name, a heart, a chance to rebuild. But wealth built on vanity will never sustain you. Your father wanted you to see that before it was too late. Her sobs filled the room, and though my heart ached for her, I did not take back the words. They were not meant to wound, but to awaken. Then there was Aaron. Quiet, reserved Aaron, who had said little throughout the will reading. He stood by the fireplace, staring at the dying embers. Finally, he spoke, his voice so low I almost missed it. I didn't think it would end like this. He didn't look at me, but I heard the weight in his words, the regret, the confusion, the disbelief that the man who gave them everything could leave them with nothing. I stepped closer. Your father told me his last words, Aaron. Do you know what they were? Aaron turned slowly, his eyes wet with unshed tears. I whispered, give them nothing until they learn what love costs. The words cut through the air like lightning, and in that moment, I knew my husband's wisdom, though harsh, was laced with hope. Behind me, Alina shifted uncomfortably. Her hands were folded, her eyes lowered. Finally, she spoke. Madam, perhaps we shouldn't take the beach house. It was too much. We were only servants in this home. I turned to her, my chest tightening with gratitude and sorrow. No, Alina, you earned it. You and your husband were here when my children were not. You showed kindness when they showed indifference. You gave love freely, expecting nothing in return. That beach house is yours, not because of service, but because of loyalty my own children could not give. The words hung in the air. Lila's sobs quieted. Aaron bowed his head. And for the first time that night, I felt a strange peace settle in the hall. I knew I had to close the wound with honesty, so I stood tall, my voice steady. This mansion's doors remain open, not for your greed, not for your demands, but for you as my children. Should you find humility, should you choose reconciliation, this home will still welcome you. But until then, you will walk your own path. That was your father's wish, and it is mine as well. The storm outside had begun to quiet, the thunder fading into the distance. I walked to the mantelpiece where the family portrait had once been taken down in anger. My trembling hands lifted it, and I placed it gently back where it belonged. The faces stared back at me, his face, my face, their faces. A family once bound by love, now torn apart by greed. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to heal. I touched the frame, whispering into the silence. In the end, my husband left them nothing. But perhaps, in losing everything, they might one day find what truly matters. And that, my dear listener, is how the storm ended in my home. But every storm leaves behind a choice. Will you rebuild, or will you let the ruins define you? If this story struck something deep within you, I invite you to stay with me. Subscribe to this channel, share this tale, and join me again for more stories that challenge the heart, stir the soul, and remind us what truly matters. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance is not what we are given, but what we learn when we are left with nothing.